I'm Sue Black. I'm a human anatomist and a forensic anthropologist, and my job is to identify the human, or what remains of the human, for medical legal purposes. And throughout my career I've worked a lot for governments overseas, and as a result I've become known as a martini girl, which is anytime, any place, anywhere, which means you always have to have your passport with you at all times because you simply never know where you're going to go next. In 1999, I received a phone call that requested me to go and assist with the recovery of evidence associated with the war crimes investigations in Kosovo. When I arrived out there, it was clear that there were just so many cases for us to undertake, and all of them have remained really, really clear in my mind. But one sticks out in particular more than any, because I feel that I was probably one of the few people that could have handled what was required of me in that situation at that time. It was the case of a family who left the village to go out into the mountains because they felt it was safer there for their children. And then on occasion they would come into the village for provisions. And on one particular day, that's exactly what they did. Dad was driving the tractor, and behind him was a trailer, and on the trailer was his wife, her sister, their mother, and the 8 children. And without warning, a rocket-propelled grenade took out the trailer. He was also shot. He was sniped in the leg, and he managed to crawl away into the undergrowth, knowing full well, because of the extent of the explosion, that none of his family would have survived. Under cover of darkness, when he was bleeding and obviously very, very badly injured, he still had the presence of mind to collect the remains of his family that he could find and to bury them in a hole. And his fear was that if he didn't, then the dogs would find them and it would be a food source for them. About 18 months later, we come along as the International Criminal Tribunal, and we ask his permission to exhume the remains, because we need to test whether the evidence that we will find matches with his eyewitness testimony. And if it does, that's a very strong indictment site against Milosevic and his senior advisors. So we dig down in the place where he told us he'd buried his family, and we recover enough remains, probably only to fill about 1.5 body bags. And our job is to try to establish how many people are contained within those remains, and do they fit with the profiles that the gentleman has told us. When we go back to the mortuary, our job is that we separate out 12 white body sheets in the mortuary, because we know that there's going to be some remains that we simply won't be able to assign to an individual. And the 11 people who lost their lives, we hope that at the end of the day there will be something relating to each and every one placed on a piece of white sheeting. His wife was relatively straightforward. We only ever found one half of his wife. Her sister was relatively straightforward, as was their mother as an older individual. And then it came to the 8 children, and the identification of children's remains is what my area of expertise is. The little baby was still intact, and so he was very, very easy to identify. But the other children were in various stages of fragmentation and decomposition. So, for example, we only ever found the bottom half of his 12-year-old daughter. By the time we had gone through the day, we got to the final stages of remains, that the last children that we were unable to separate out with any certainty were twin boys aged 14 years of age. And what we noticed is that one of the upper sets of limbs had a Mickey Mouse vest associated with them. And so I asked the police to go away and to ask Dad, did any of his children wear a Mickey Mouse vest? Not was it one of the twins, but any of the children. And the police officer came back and said, oh yes, and named one of the twin boys. And that allows us to identify which possibly were each of the twin boys. Our rationale for doing it was that the law requires it of us, in terms of our recovery of evidence and our analysis of evidence, but also it was important for the father, because his biggest concern was that his family's remains were commingled in a mixed grave, and his fear was that his God was unable to find each and every one of them because they were mixed together. His wish was that he would have 11 body bags returned to him, each one carrying the name of the particular member of his family, because then he felt if they had a grave with their own name on it, then their God would be able to find them. Now, we were able to return 11 body bags with a name, and of course a 12th body bag that had body parts in it that we simply couldn't separate. And for us it's really challenging to marry together those worlds of being an impartial clinical forensic investigator and somebody who's looking down the barrel of a man who has lost his entire family, and all he's asking of us is to have the confidence that the remains that we return to him are who we say they are.